Morning, everyone. I'm John Anderson. I'm product planner for Fluke Networks Air Magnet. And with me today, as many of you know, is Dil Padvani. He's the product marketing manager. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We're very excited to be able to have you here, make an announcement about our next product coming up and what we're working on. And let's get right to it. So obviously, the whole industry is very active. A lot of discussions around the new IEEE standard 802.11ac. We saw shipments of these access points and clients going back to late last year. And we are very excited to announce that we are getting ready to release the first site survey tool that can be used to measure real-world end-user experience, end-user performance on real-world 802.11ac adapters. So there's a lot of aggressive forecasts out there, more so than access points for Wi-Fi for 11ac clients and chipsets, but it's really the sale and deployment of the access point that's going to determine this transition. And what we see is that this is going to be a gradual transition to 11ac over the next several years. And what that really means is we will be working in a heterogeneous environment for a very long time. So Wi-Fi professionals like yourselves are lucky to have yet another technology that you get to deploy and make work and deal with. And I think this is going to be with us for a while. And that's kind of what's interesting about the challenges it brings, is that 11ac is not going to replace anything, at least not off the bat. It's just going to be added to the mix of technologies that these networks will have to support. So 11ac being rolled out in 2 phases, according to the Wi-Fi Alliance certification programs, does bring a number of key performance enhancements. And many of you are familiar with these, so I'm not going to go over them in details. But obviously, we've got the wider channels that will be available now, 80 megahertz, and down the road, perhaps maybe even 160 megahertz. We will have down the road this concept of multi-user MIMO, which is really going to introduce some really interesting user capacity improvements. And we have the higher order modulation and coding schemes. And really what all these different techniques and methodologies do, what do they bring to the user? Well, it's really about the higher rates. They're going to introduce higher throughput rates. Now, obviously, the PHY rates are going to increase. So for a 3x3 spatial stream or MIMO transmission, we will be seeing up to 1.3 gigabits per second on the PHY connection rates for 11ac. Now, obviously, user throughput rates won't meet that, but they will have significant improvement over what we see on 11n. But as we will see in a few moments, that depends on a number of factors, neither guaranteed nor for certain. But what those higher rates really mean, does a single client really need several hundred megabits per second streaming to them consistently? Well, what it really means is more user density, more user capacity on your network. So when a client can download a file or upload an email attachment faster, they can get on and off the air faster and allow more clients on there. So really, increased user capacity certainly does bring a key benefit from 11ac, but that really comes back to the higher rates. It depends on having those higher bit rates, those higher performance, in order to really make that happen. And then the third really key benefit is that it's been designed from the get-go to be backwards compatible with legacy technologies. So there is no greenfield mode. Basically, an 11ac access point will support 11a and 11n clients in the 5 gig band. And all the 11ac access points that we see shipping, they do support dual band as well. So it is all about performance. All the benefits of 11ac, including the increased user capacity, really comes down to performance. So we were curious. We wanted to see this for ourselves. We've talked to many of you, many other people about it. We've heard different stories about whether or not 11ac really does provide these higher throughputs. So we tested a couple different 11ac adapters out there, keeping all variables the same access point, the same client, the same PC, the same USB 3.0 port. We tested the throughput, and the only thing that changed was first we established an 11n connection and then 11ac connection, same distance. And we did see significant improvement that 11ac brought over 11n in user throughput. But it also depends on the equipment that's in use and, of course, a number of other factors. So it really confirmed what we expected. 11AC does provide higher throughput rates, but it depends on a number of factors. And there's no guarantee, there's no predictability into what these performance improvements are really going to be. So many factors, so many complexities in deploying these multi-access point networks that it really comes down to being able to measure them.
And we did not limit our testing scenarios just to do these two adapters. We went beyond the Edimax and TrendNet adapters. We looked at the Netgear adapter, the D-Link adapter, as well as the latest Intel adapter. So if anybody is interested in looking at those results, comparing the adapters in a certain environment under a certain environmental condition, we can share that with the team as well.
Yes. Well, without making it a conversation about adapters, did you find a strong preference from a quality, performance, throughput, reliability, stability perspective?
So I'll let John answer that.
Yeah, we did see a number of differences. You know, when trying to use these adapters for our test products, we do see a number of differences in how they bring up different measurement values and different measurements to the Windows systems.
Yep.
But we see differences in throughput performance. We see differences in reliability. I mean, these are standard adapters you can go out there and buy from different manufacturers. So there are variances. So what we really what will be in our new survey product that we're working on releasing, we are supporting a few of these adapters. What we really look for are having adapters that were globally available, but also looking for some that are very high performing.
And I think the choice that people will make in terms of what adapters to use on their daily basis versus what they want to use inside a tool will be influenced by a number of things, right? So if you're doing a site survey and the corporation is rolling out Intel-based laptops, obviously you're going to do your testing or you're going to use your tools based on the Intel laptop, right? Irrespective of whether Edimax is better or TrendNet's better or Netgear is better. So I think there are lots of other strong influencers around that particular situation. But we saw some unexpected results from certain vendors as well that we can share. I know that's where, Sam, you're getting towards.
It is.
So with all the complexities that 11AC brings, a lot of your customers, a lot of companies out there have questions about should they go ahead and upgrade to 11AC? Should they, if they're on 11G, just go ahead and upgrade to 11N, wait till AC is ratified? Do they phase it in? Do they do a forklift transition? How do they get the performance improvements of 11AC? A lot of questions out there. We will be publishing some brochures and documents trying to address some of these things. But we'll also, when we provide a demo of our survey, we'll show some use cases about how that can be used to address some of these questions that many companies have right now about upgrading to 11AC.
And a lot of research has gone into developing these questions. I know some of them sound very simple, but over the last few years, and especially when we went through the 11N transition and all these things, we learned, right, customers, right, or users or IT people who are responsible for installing the network or system integrators, right, they have very basic questions in their mind, like, should I even go to 11AC, right? How should I transition? Should I do a rip and replace? Should I just do a slow rollout? So very basic questions. I know they sound simple, but I think there are lots of complicated answers and analysis that needs to be done to answer some of these simple questions. And that's our attempt with the Air Magnet Survey application, and as we move along with the rest of the Air Magnet Mobile Suite to ease the pain for the transition.
I'm curious as to what your experience has been really with testing these USB adapters. The limited testing that I've done kind of made it clear to me that really AC is going to really take off when it's integrated into the laptop, that the USB adapters are really not going to give users the performance that they're wanting to get out of their network. So I'm curious as to whether you've seen that much of a difference between, say, a card that would be a PCI Express card built into a laptop versus a USB adapter.
Yeah, I mean, the PCI Express bus is going to be a little bit more efficient and likely provide more higher throughput. But even with USB, again, we see a difference in between different models. And we also see a key difference between USB 2.0 and USB 3.0. Even though USB 2.0 is supposed to support rates, upwards north of 400 megabits, even when we're testing far from the access point and seeing, rates between 50 and 100 megabits per second in user throughput, we do tend to see higher throughputs coming over with the USB 3.0 versus the USB 2.0. So And again, I think the performance improvements, even over 11N, are still going to be realized with USB adapters. So we may see better performance with PCI Express adapters. You still will see the improvements over 11N, even using the USB adapter.
I've just found it was kind of marginal with the USB adapters from an 11N that's supporting 3 streams to
Absolutely. I think it also depends on the distance you are from the AP. I think the big benefit you will see on 11AC is when you're within that 20, 30, 40 feet from an AP, right, as compared to when you're 50 or 60 feet away, which may be what's practical in an enterprise environment. So I think that drastic drop takes place, which brings 11AC a lot more closer to what the 11N with the 3x3 will perform. So I think that is what is going to shape how people conduct surveys, how people deploy their networks, right? To take this advantage of this great benefit that 11AC offers, right? Maybe you need to install more access points because you need to be closer to the client to get those higher throughput values.
So yeah, and, I mean, under best case scenarios, both the results that we see published by infrastructure vendors and our own results show that under best case scenarios, 11AC, all with the same number of spatial streams, can provide a 2 to 3 times improvement over 11N. But in real world conditions, as you get further from access points, as your 80 megahertz channels, which is going to be the biggest boost to performance, as those have to fall back to 20 or 40 meg because of 11A and 11N clients, those performance improvements will decrease.
I think what Chris is after, though, is that right now there's so much discrepancy in adapter performance. How do you how do you pick an adapter to be used as the baseline?
Recommended.
Yeah, a recommended adapter for measurement or tools or testing for doing design validation, right? Because the answer today, or the answer like when 11N came out was, oh, you have to survey with the adapter you're going to be deploying. Well, that just doesn't work in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Most corporations don't spec the type of network card they're going to be using, much less, hey, you need to be using an Intel, blah, this particular model number, right? It just doesn't happen.
Yes.
And so until that becomes pervasive and prevalent, what do we do from a testing perspective?
Well, what we're doing at AirMagnet is we're trying these different adapters, and we're selecting ones that we see gives us high performance. And we'll do that on a continuous basis, and those are the ones that we'll support with survey. And then it just becomes a matter of using those adapters and a set of best practices. The survey is really about validating your deployment and optimizing it. So having, using a consistent adapter from one time to the next and being able to use those metrics, those performance objectives as benchmarks is really what you'll need to do.
And the reason we support so many adapters instead of just fixating ourselves on a single adapter, right? Because what we've learned, right, there are many soft reasons behind why people choose certain adapters. We've had people tell us, oh, I do not want to buy a consumer level adapter, even though it may provide the best performance and is generally available. They say, oh, it's consumer level, maybe I don't want to buy it.
But the consumer level's your client device everywhere.
But then we have people say that. So some of the responses that we get from people, right, in terms of the adapter selection are a bit different from what we would expect as an audience when we as the experts are out in the field doing this on a daily basis as such. But again, that's my whole point, that's why we will support multiple adapters. We cannot force people to use a certain adapter. We will provide reasonings behind why we selected certain adapters, whether it's USB 3.0 support, whether if it's Intel, that's the advantage of it being built inside the PC, or whether it's some other adapter which provides the best throughput. So we will provide some of those results, and then we still leave it up to the audience to make their decision as such.
I'll just throw in, love to have, love to have a Broadcom set as well.
Yes,
There's
so
a couple of us
that
that
is
use these
something that
instead.
you will see as we move along, right? So I think Broadcom has done a good job in leading the market on new 802.11ac solutions. So as John moves along and Ilya gets here, we'll talk about how we have also looked into some of those chipset opportunities with other vendors.
So 11AC is introducing some significant impacts on how these networks are deployed and how they are surveyed and validated. And perhaps the most important one is we are operating in a varied environment now, supporting many different client technologies, many different antenna configurations. And that makes your end user performance less predictable. can't really look at your specific parameters underlying the performance and come up with accurate prediction with what your end users are going to get. Channel allocation also becomes a very critical piece of your planning. It was with 11N, obviously, when 40 megahertz channels were introduced, but now with 80 megahertz channels, the increased likelihood of overlapping, the lesser number of these wider channels that are available for multi-access point deployments, how you assign channels to your access points becomes very critical. And we'll look at some ways that our survey will help address that impact. User performance versus coverage. So with the proliferation of Wi-Fi devices and clients out there, user density becomes the primary design objective here. We had one, I think it was Ruckus, who was recommending in a recent webinar that when you're deploying access points in general, depending on a number of factors, of course, you should deploy at least 1.5 times the number of APs for capacity that you would for coverage. And so if you're going to deploy enough access points to handle your user density, chances are your RF coverage is going to be sufficient. So now you want to make sure user performance, which is what contributes to your density, your capacity, meets your design objectives. How you size your cells also impacted, and of course wired or Ethernet network capacity. So when you upgrade from 11G or 11N to 11AC, do you also have to upgrade your uplinks to your network in order to handle that extra capacity? Do you now need 2 gig E-links to an access point rather than just 1? These are all things that need to be considered. We're probably not going to have enough time to go through all of these, but I do want to address some of these top ones here. So predictability, we're facing deployments that have to support a number of different technologies. In the 5 gig band, obviously, we still have 11A and 11N clients. In the 2.4 gig band, good spectrum. I mean, there's no reason to abandon 2.4. We need the bandwidth, and most of these access points that are shipping for 11AC will continue to support both bands. Number of different applications being used with different bit rate needs, different types of devices with different antenna configurations. It's a varied environment. All of these really comes down to makes your end user performance in different areas of your floor plan much less predictable. So how does this impact surveys? Well, you want to obviously continue to deploy and optimize your networks with surveying the contributing factors to the performance. So a passive survey will still tell you how your coverage meets, if your coverage meets your requirements, with the factors that contribute to performance. So these include signal levels, channel widths, channel interference, modulation and coding schemes. These are all contributing factors, and it's still critical to make sure that they meet your deployment requirements. Then you want to validate that deployment with a survey of your actual user throughput. This will avoid costly redesigns in the future so that when you leave, you know that you're meeting your end user objectives. And you'll, and then user performance obviously becomes a more critical validation factor than coverage does. So how is the new survey going to address these? Well, we're updating our surveys for 11AC parameters. So surveying the contributing factors, still a very critical part of the deployment validation process. So we have our channel width coverage survey heat map, and we're adding both 80 megahertz and 160 megahertz channel widths to it. So we know that 160 megahertz isn't yet supported in the infrastructure, but when it does, survey is ready there to support it. So in this particular screenshot, and we'll show this in a live demo later, we've added the brown color represents coverage of an 80 megahertz channel. And this blue here, if you're familiar with Survey Pro, represents coverage of a legacy 20 megahertz channel. We also have all the other parameters like signal levels, code channel interference, modulation, and coding schemes all here. But then for validation, we have a iPerf throughput survey, so you can measure user throughput, actual user throughput on an actual 11AC adapter, both in the up and the downstreams. What we see is up and downstreams continue to be asymmetrical as far as the rates go. There's some access point vendors are recommending deploying access points close enough to user bases to try to make those rates more symmetrical, because obviously user behavior is becoming more symmetrical. There's a lot of applications now that need just as much throughput on the upstream as the downstream. But what we see in real life is those rates do tend to be still asymmetrical. So being able to survey in both directions is very important. So the Survey Pro for 11AC will help to validate that the multiple factors contributing to your performance meets your requirements. And by doing the throughput survey, it removes that uncertainty about what the user is really going to be getting.
Is this just a software upgrade for existing Air Magnet users, or is this a different product? Or is
This is an existing software upgrade for existing customers under Gold support. So as long as you're under the support and maintenance contract, you get this free upgrade.
Okay.
And again, we'll get into timelines and stuff as we move along as well. And then one thing I wanted to, sorry.
No, go ahead, Tom.
So one thing I wanted to mention, right? So few of you may have a question in your mind that why didn't Air Magnet introduce 11AC planner, right? Because we could have done that months ago. We don't need to depend on an adapter at all, right? So what we've learned over the last couple of years is people, they don't care about if they have 4 bars on their phone or if their laptop shows the signals full strength, right? They care about being able to browse the internet, being able to watch the video. That is why time and time again, people have come back to us and said, if you ever have to introduce something, it always has to be to measure the real world experience. It does not mean that Air Magnet will not have 11AC planner. We did it the same way for 11N. We obviously introduced the 11N survey product first, and then we got to the 11N planner. And that is going to be our strategy for 11AC as well. Yes, sir.
A lot of conversation around throughput, and I'd like to hear some feedback on the other value of 802.11ac is airtime fairness. You know, most enterprise access points today aren't overwhelmed with traffic, right? Although devices are coming, you know, they're coming on by the truckload. But the limited testing that I've done the last few months, I've seen more value in the airtime fairness and utilization. I can get a packet on the network, even at the cell edge, 3 or 4 or 5 times faster than an N client, and sometimes 30 times faster than a G client. So I was wondering if you had any comments.
Yeah, I mean, airtime fairness is critical because you got 11A and 11N clients on there, and especially 11A clients, if they're using up too much of the air, it will definitely impact your 11AC performance. And the access point vendors, at least some of the leading ones I know, are really working hard on their RRM techniques to try to manage that, try to make sure that all the clients have the same amount of airtime, try to distribute that equally. So we see that as a very important performance measurement. It does require some deep level adapter driver code work, and we are going to be working on next releases to really work that into our product. That's probably going to be something that would rest on the Wi-Fi analyzer product. So we see that as being a very important measurement for Wi-Fi analyzer. And I totally agree with you that it is going to be a key performance indicator for some of these access points. I saw some propaganda, I believe it was from Ruckus, comparing airtime fairness among different access points, and they're promoting it real strong.
Yeah, you mentioned the analyzer. Can you comment on the 11AC rollout for that?
Yeah, so what we're doing, right, and it goes back to Keith's question about what adapter we support, right? So right now with this 802.11ac survey release, we are going to be supporting Broadcom-based chipsets and adapters, right? So right now, we do not have the deep driver-related integration with the Broadcom chipsets. That's why moving it into the so-called promiscuous mode, where you can actually sniff packets, is not possible at this point of time with the Broadcom chipset as such. So we are working closely with chipset vendors. We are working closely with our traditional chipset vendors we've supported in the past, whether it's Intel or whether it's Qualcomm, Atheros, to include that type of a solution. So right now, there is no schedule that we have that we can discuss in public as such, but we definitely have it on our roadmap, right? Because that's been always our attempt, right? Because we follow the same life cycle, right? And Chachi promoted that, and that's our mantra, you can say, as such, right? So it's important for us to get that 11AC support on the Wi-Fi analyzer.
And I just wanted to clarify that I heard you correctly. Today there are no 11AC adapters that you can put in promiscuous mode?
Yes, not that we have, right? So again, when we get into the demos for the survey, again, it's going to use the native Windows driver. So we've done it slightly differently. It's been different from what Air Magnet has done in the last 10 years or 12 years as such. So It's slightly different. Yes, Keith?
Can you started down the planner and planning
Yes.
for AC. I'd just like to see more of that. I mean, you started to explain it.
Okay.
You,
Why we chose not to do planner right from the beginning? Right, so again, like I mentioned, right, so we've had people come back and say, I want to see the true end user performance, right? Planner, again, I think planning softwares, I'm not going to talk about Air Magnet Planner in general or any competitor or whoever, right? Planning software can do the job as good as it can, as such, right? Because again, depends on how you draw the walls, how do you draw and mark all the environmental constructions, right? So that is why we always believe, right, that when you are on site, you're performing the test, you're accounting for all of the situations, whether it could be from the interference sources that cannot be moved from an environment, which is our strength as well, right? With our integration with Spectrum XT, you perform surveys as well as you can perform spectrum surveys as well, right? So that is why we've always believed to go down the path of first doing survey, not saying we will never do 11AC planner. Yes, there is an importance of doing 11AC planner. There will be situations where people may not have the budget to travel on site, people's budget may be cut, people may have similar type of buildings where they say, let me do one planning, let me replicate it for the other buildings. So there are situations where planner is the perfect tool or is the best starting tool as such. But again, we had to make a choice as to which one to do first. It's a balancing act. So that is why we chose, let's get the ultimate product as such, which people are waiting for.
I have a question. Going back to the iPerf thing, with such a large amount of variability between the different client adapters that people are going to be using in AC, how are we going to be able to say that doing an iPerf test is going to give them valid data that's equivalent to what their clients are going to experience on their network?
Well, again, we are looking at the different adapters and trying to select one with a balance of global availability and performance. So we're going to be working, and we'll support not just USB adapter, we've got a PCIe adapter support that's going to be included. But try to make sure that we're hitting the most common ones, but also the highest performing ones, basically, to do that.
Will there be things in the tool that will allow you to account for that variability in the clients?
Yeah, and again, if I go back to your variability thing, right? So variability is not a new concept, right? Again, I think it started with the 11N times as such, right? And obviously 11AC is making it worse as such, right? So again, we provide the user to perform a survey with multiple adapters. We've seen people do that, right? That not only do they do with a single adapter, again, depending on the client's budget, the time they have, the stringent requirements somebody may have, right? That's right. They may use multiple adapters as part of a survey. They may do it only for certain locations which are mission critical with multiple adapters to say, okay, let me just try the 2 or 3 most common adapters, right? Obviously, they're going to use the adapters that are available out there, right? So that's what we've seen people do as such. Also in our application, as you know, Air Magnet Survey has this calibration and simulation capabilities where we allow the results captured by a single adapter to be calibrated to a spectrum analyzer because we see it as a reference point where you look at raw RF energy. And then we also have capabilities of simulating that data to different adapters as such.
Yeah, and I think we still do a lot of that today. We benchmark with the larger population of clients that we use, right?
Right.
But this is going to be a challenge for everyone.
So also, obviously, channel allocation is another huge impact. Now, if you're planning on deploying the wider channels that 11AC brings, how do you do that? How do you ensure that you've got enough coverage without co-channel interference? Primary versus secondary overlap here becomes a very important distinction, right? So with 80 megahertz channels, and you probably have all seen this diagram before, it's from a Cisco white paper, but with these 80 megahertz channels, 2 adjacent access points can have complete overlap of their 80 megahertz channels. If their primary 20 megahertz channels overlap, then they are going to interfere with each other. They won't be able to transmit simultaneously. However, if they've got their primary channels on separate 20 megahertz channels and there is collision in the air, they can still transmit simultaneously, they just have to fall back. So 11AC has this fallback mechanisms that will allow transmissions on 20 or 40 megahertz channels if you have the secondary overlap. So it becomes a secondary overlap will have an impact on your 11AC performance, because at that time they cannot transmit on 80 megahertz, but it does not have as much impact as a primary channel overlap. So being able to tell these two apart becomes very important. On AirMagnet Survey Pro for 11AC, we are adding the wider channels for 11AC, both 80 megahertz and 160 megahertz, to our channel width coverage maps. We also have our channel interference that shows you where your individual code channels overlap and to what severity. But we're introducing a new heat map here that will indicate where you will have primary and secondary overlap to really make this distinction for you. So where you have two primary channels in the 5 gig band overlapping, we will highlight in red. Where you have secondary channels that are overlapping that will cause a fallback to 20 megahertz, we'll highlight in yellow. And in green, we highlight where you will have either no overlapping channels, or if you do have secondary channels overlapping, you can still fall back to 40 megahertz transmissions.
Years ago, when AirMagnet was right on the cusp of N coming out, you came out with a bunch of N tools. In the tools section of Wi-Fi Analyzer, I think they've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people learn how N works by using simulators. And are you thinking of doing the same thing with AC?
Absolutely, right, because that's something that is within our control as such, so that is something that we have on our roadmap as such. Whether it's a simulator tool, whether it's a calculator, or the efficiency tool.
Exactly.
Absolutely, yes.
So going back 2 slides, you had a slide that had the the chunk of spectrum, and of course it calls out support for DFS channels. Most of the adapters I see today don't support DFS, the AC adapters. So that's obviously going to severely limit those adapters' ability to function if you're using 80, 160 megahertz wide. What's your opinion on how long before that becomes not a problem?
I'm hoping it's very, very quickly. I personally don't understand why more and more clients don't support DFS channels.
So this whole thing basically doesn't work, meaning 802.11ac without DFS support, right? Without at least in the marketing glossies that we all know and love, right?
Yeah. Well, you still well.
I think the number of non-overlapping channels are less, right? So if you look at the U.S. and again in the 5 gigahertz spectrum, the number of non-overlapping channels may drop by half as such with the lack of DFS, but it's not like it's unusable completely.
No, but
it's still going to be better than what you have with your 11N.
Certainly, but when you start talking about 80 and even 160 megahertz channels, why? When the clients simply don't support it in a fashion that makes even those conversations tangible at this point, right? Because you have to survey for as many clients as you possibly can, which means you.
I mean, that's an important part of your pre-deployment survey is to see. There's 2 things you have to consider. One, are your DFS channels available in your environment? And you can do that with Spectrum Analyzer, Spectrum Survey. And then 2, does your client base support DFS channels or not?
But if your customers don't.
And customers are clueless, right? Customers,
what we're talking about.
that goes back to recommending an adapter for our customers. They simply don't.
Yeah.
So put another way, the assumption is that they don't.
Right.
I mean, what else do you do?
Well, it really comes down to your channel allocation plan. You can use 180 megahertz channels with DFS. I mean, with avoiding DFS channels. That 80 megahertz channels, so you can have at least one channel that's wide. Your other channels you can avoid DFS and just have 20 megahertz channels, but at least you have some performance that you can extract from that one channel. And then you can have a few 40 megahertz channels. You can still realize some of the performance benefits, but I really think that, especially with 11AC and trying to push the performance improvements and really relying on having those wider channels, that more and more clients are going to open up and use those DFS channels. I don't know. I can't give you a prediction when or what numbers we're going to see, but I'm confident that we're going to see more and more clients, especially with 11AC, supporting DFS channels, just to realize the benefits. And again, there's not a lot of environments that are out there that would be interfered with by radar in those particular
Again,
channels.
we're still through this early transition phase of 11AC. I think people are still understanding 11AC, chipset vendors, adapter vendors there. I think they're still trying to innovate there. Obviously, 11AC, just like 11N, introduced tons of optional things, right? Which certain vendor may just say, oh, who cares, right? I'm just going to do the mandatory stuff, I'll move on. While certain vendors may go a couple of steps ahead and say, this is important for my customer. This is what is going to make my customer happy. They may choose to move ahead. So I think we're at this early phase with 11AC still just slowly taking off. I think as it becomes mainstream in the next couple of years, so we should start seeing many of the chipset vendors, many of the adapter vendors, whether out of their own choice or being forced by the world, to implement some of those things.
Finally, performance becomes a key design objective, a key validation objective, more so than coverage. So we talked about this a little bit, but being able to, your RF coverage is probably going to get there by default if you're designing and deploying to handle user density. How does this impact your survey? Well, performance continues to be the final objective that you want to validate, but it's still important to be able to survey and validate your contributing factors there. So the Survey Pro for 11AC will offer surveys for the key contributing performance factors like signal, MCS, channel width, interference, operating mode. We've introduced the new 11AC VHT operating mode to our survey map, PHY rates, and then, of course, validating that with a user throughput. And we will continue to support the AirWise engine on 11AC. So once you've done your passive survey, you can validate it meets your performance requirements with a single step using AirWise, and you can also use the user density requirement for that. So it'll ensure that the contributing performance factors meet your design requirements while validating the final design with your user performance survey.
And again, AirWise is or has been and will be very key for us and our customers, because what we've seen is the type of customers who are using the survey type of tools, who are responsible for collecting data or making any deployment decisions, right? The one thing that's coming to them is the customers may be looking for like a pass or fail assessment, right? Just tell me, does this thing work or not? Does it pass and meets my requirements, or does it fail, right? So our story has always been that AirWise is key to verify, to give not only the system integrator or the installer the confidence when he walks off the site that I did a good job, it met the requirements as recommended by AirMagnet, I can confidently give this report to the customer and be confident that he's not going to call me back and say, oh, the network doesn't work. It's going to be costly for him, costly for the customer. It may impact his future business of getting referrals or whatever, right? So that's where AirWise has been key, will be key for us to help build the confidence of whoever is designing and deploying the network as such.
Do you have any one of the things I love AirWise. AirWise is like a halfway house, though, to where we need to be. In the cabling world, we had near side crosstalk, far side crosstalk, pinouts, twist ratios, and engineers got lost in those until a group got together and said, oh, we'll call this Cat 5 and put the specs under a really short little term, or Cat 5e, and then you can measure them with a quick thing and say, oh, this meets Cat 5e specs, then gig works. Is there a way to get all of those same little nitty-gritty pieces, instead of near side crosstalk, far side crosstalk, what voice grade Wi-Fi is, and then just say this is voice grade certified?
Absolutely right. So I think this goes back to what the cable world did, and where Fluke has led the industry on the cabling certification or cabling standardization side. So I think that's a great thought that you have, that we could definitely look into the future as well. Yeah, because I think that's what, and I think it, again, when Fluke Networks came up with a cabling standard, right, and became the de facto tool in the industry, I think a lot of work went into it, and there were inputs from experts like you guys sitting here as such. So I think it's always a joint effort, not only from us, it's the infrastructure vendor, it's the user, it's system integrators, it's experts like you. So again, we would love to lead the industry on this type of a standardization or certification type of opportunity as well.
I would graded plot. In the short term, though, could you add more? Right now, there's like a Cisco 7982. I mean, there's a Cisco voice checkbox. Fill that out with an ASCOM and a SpectraLink and something from Motorola for hand scanners or something.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, AirWise is a good start on that. It's a good infrastructure for the product.
And you get the good shell, just
add the profiles.
because a lot of people don't know what the spec should be, so the vendor knows. You put the vendor ones in.
Yeah, and that's where we work very closely with the vendors, right? Again, we may not have all the vendors in place in that AirWise engine, but then we constantly try to work with them. We try to look at their design recommendation guidelines as such. So expect many of those things with our 11AC solution within the AirWise piece. Right?
No, I'm a fan of AirWise, but I tell you, in non-educated hands, it can be overwhelming. Just too many alerts, too much, they start chasing their tail on something that may not be right.
The AirWise and Wi-Fi analyzer, I agree. AirWise here is a validator. It doesn't have the same trips and alarms that the other one does.
I'm just curious real quick, who amongst the delegates here actually uses AirWise?
So it's like an even split, roughly.
Who likes AirWise and trusts AirWise data? No offense to the, I'm just
No problem at all.
for the sake of discussion.
I like it, yeah.
Absolutely.
They have to quantify what use means.
See, yeah, my thing is like, I want to be able to trust it, but I don't know how it's calculating it. I don't know what you're doing in your back end to come up with all those data points, and I want to. The geek in me wants to see the formulas that you're actually using, so I can validate and actually be comfortable using that data to validate my design.
I think what AirWise does is that based on how you've conducted your site survey, you've captured the results from what the adapters told you. Obviously, you can go through simulation, calibration scenarios if needed. Then AirWise works on that collected data. So if you don't believe the collected data, I think it's a different discussion. But I think if we believe the collected data is accurate as it can be with a measurement tool, AirWise works on that as such. So to give you an example, right? So if we may say, okay, is this ready for a Cisco voice deployment, for example, right, for a 7925. So we work very closely with Cisco, plus looked at their voice design guides, and we've seen that they recommend that you have 2 APs at a certain location. This should be the signal strength, minus 67 or minus 72. The signal to noise ratio should be 25 and things like that. So based on the collected data, right, the AirWise engine kicks in and then basically just tells you, is it meeting the requirement or is it not meeting the requirement?
Is there a difference?
So it's not like it's doing some additional analysis and now re-crunching something as such. So it's taking existing measured real-world data.
But is there a big difference between using the heat map and the sliders to get that?
Same data.
Okay, so then that's what I do.
You can do it manually.
You can do it manually. This is easing it.
Using those screenshots for reports typically.
Yeah.
To show.
Yeah.
It's the exact same data. It's whether or not it shows in green, as in we met versus not met, versus the other ones you can have gradients.
Okay.
Well, and when you're looking at the display view, you can't differentiate 2 APs and cell overlap, right?
So you can do the per AP report and then look at the picture that way.
Yeah,
I
but
print
you
out
can't, you don't
transparencies, and then I layer them.
Yeah.
I think one thing that actually was just mentioned on Twitter, interference seems to be black magic in AM, and I was just thinking about the way that survey measures interference. Now, from what I know of the way client adapters works, they're not generally set to being able to readily measure interference in a way that meets Blake's objectives of having some objective validation of that. And so it's kind of a mystery to me as to how AirMagnet figures out that there's all this interference in an error.
I think on the interference side, again, there are 2 pieces of interference, and Keith believes in interference, and then I think he's spoken about it a number of times as well, right? So when people say generic interference and expecting you to get some sort of special readings from an adapter, that doesn't happen. You need a Spectrum adapter to do that, and we do that with Spectrum XT.
Right.
Yes, we report the noise values that we get from the adapter itself, and then for the interference, we do have a calculation which is available to the public, right, where we look at the interfering APs and the interfered APs, and we look at their signal levels as such. So again, it is not a standard way of calculating interference, like if I go back to Keith, but I think it has been very well accepted. It has been tried and tested in the field to provide that. And maybe I'll lean towards Keith to...
The AirWise interference
Uh-huh.
actually matches Cisco's way of describing interference. So Cisco has some graphics that show an AP on 6 and 11, 2 on 1, and there's a gap in between. It's the gap that's used for AirWise. So it matches the Cisco voice design guide exactly.
That's what's set by default, but it's also configurable.
But you can change them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's all configurable. So if some other infrastructure vendor comes along and they say, oh, the interfering versus the interfered AP, the signal level should be slightly different because we handle it differently, we are resilient, we are this, we are that, then you have the flexibility within the application to fine-tune it.
Yeah, it's going to get even more difficult with AC to be able to measure the impact between the APs of interference, especially when you're trying to use 80 megahertz channels.
Yeah, and that's why we have, we really have two maps to do. We have our traditional channel interference map, which works the way that was described. You have two dBm levels, an interfering level and an interfered with level, set by default to well-accepted values, still configurable. But then we have the new, more of a three-value one to show where you have primary and secondary overlaps to help validate the plan. So I'd like to try to get to the product demo here. So really we just have this is just a quick summary of what's coming out, the solutions that's coming out with the new Survey Pro for 11AC. And so we'll cover most of these during the demo, but what it really brings to the user is the ability to provide accurate design deployment using very accurate measurements, the leading survey tool on the market. We are providing obviously the iPerf throughput survey. We're doing passive surveys, so all the key contributing factors like channel width, interference, overlaps, PHY data rights, MCS can all be surveyed and validated. And then we're also doing an active access point association survey so that you can really see when you're actively associated with an access point and you're realizing all the benefits it provides of RRM and beam steering, you can see actually what your RF coverage is.
Can you, like in the previous ones, run an active and a passive on two separate NICs?
So
I
right
have
now,
two AC NICs.
So right now we're still working on that because again, right now we don't have the schedule. So so what we're doing is we're doing it in phases as such, right? And again, this is public information, right? So right now, if you go to our website, there's an opportunity to sign up for beta software for this application, which will be available in the next couple of weeks as such. And then the product will finally be available in the October timeframe as such, right? So we have still not come to the stage where we have tried the multi-adapter mode as such. Because again, this is different from what we've traditionally done, right, where we have control over the driver and stuff like that. This is relying on the Windows native driver. So we are in the stage of testing it in this multi-adapter mode as such. But we still don't know as yet.
So two questions. One is you're moving away from requiring a custom driver, and you're
We're
leveraging.
not moving away.
No, but
we're just adapting to the situation.
You're adapting to the okay. So are you planning on carrying that forward with other legacy adapters, such as the Proxima adapters, things along those lines, or are you expecting to use a custom driver in the future?
We will be providing support using custom drivers in the future to give all the full feature set and measurements of it.
At some point.
Yeah, at some point. It'll be some point soon. So we're coming out with a release that uses standard USB and PCIe adapters using native Windows drivers and providing the functionality we're talking about here. We will likely add more adapters to that support list, but at the same time, we are actively working. As Dilp mentioned, we're actively engaged now with the leading silicon vendors to work on custom adapters that will give more promiscuous mode analysis, both for survey and for Wi-Fi analyzer.
And at some point in time, we do have the vision that you may have XYZ adapter or chipset built inside, and the air magnet application, at least for site survey, should work automatically. That's our vision right now, because there are so many different chipsets. There's lots of testing that needs to be done before we can pound our chest and say, we guarantee that it will work, right? So again, we're doing this in bits and pieces, initially starting in this native wireless, native Windows driver mode with certain adapters. We're taking 11AC as a platform to launch that particular direction as such, and then slowly expect more adapters, and at some point of time, you'll see us making the claim that it will support any adapter in the world.
And I didn't see anything about AirMapper.
So AirMapper, right? So again, so two things there, right? Obviously, I think the first 11AC phone or something got announced from Samsung. Yeah. I think this was just 1 or 2 weeks ago. I don't think it's still available in the United States. I know it's certain regions in Asia Pacific and UK and stuff. I think it just started last week. In terms of the application working on that Samsung 82211AC based phone, the application will work, right? It's about reporting that high throughput, right? So we haven't updated the AirMapper application as of today. It is on a roadmap. It is a critical component of our life cycle, right? Because we see that the BYOD phenomenon and the importance of measuring that real-world performance metrics on a smart device, right? Because smart devices are the future, right, for computing as such. So we are slowly getting to that in AirMapper as well. So with now Samsung making that available, it makes it easier for us to do testing and stuff like that. Obviously, we can always update the legend and say capabilities of going up to 500 Mbps throughput, and we could be done. But then again, we have to be very careful. Without something being available, without us testing it, it puts us in a dangerous situation at times, to be honest. Yeah. But we will get there.